Hello. In this presentation, we are going to talk about the main steps that occur in the field development process. We're going to go through the main steps, what activities are made within each step, and and just give a full overview of the process. So this is the whole timeline with all the activities in the field development process. You have We have discussed this earlier. We have pre-exploration, we have exploration and appraisal. At some point in this stage, we have a discovery, and then we have a decision gate that we have to decide if the project is commercially viable and we're going to continue working with it, or if we're going to do something else. Then we have the planning phase in which we have the feasibility studies, we have concept planning, we have pre-engineering, and we have decision gates almost in between all of these stages. Then we have something very important, which is after the pre-engineering, we have the decision gate 3, in which the plan for development and operations is sent to the authorities for their approval. After that, if the plan is approved and is decided to build the field, then we go to the project execution phase, in which we have the detailed engineering, the construction, and the testing and startup. And at that point, we have one last decision gate in which we decide to go forward, to move to operations, and finally, after operations, we come to abandonment and decommissioning. As I mentioned earlier, the length or the number of squares or arrows here doesn't represent the length. Usually operations is something that takes long time we can say between 5 and maybe 30 more years, 30 plus years. Abandonment and decommissioning happens only in a few years. The execution and construction maybe something between 3, maybe 6 years. Project planning, something that usually happens in 2, 4 years, and the exploration and the identification of the business case can take quite a long time, but usually it's also try to be done in short time. So during this process here, you have the timeline a bit more compressed with all the phases. Okay, business case identification, planning, execution, operations, and decommissioning. And within this part, that's what we are going to be focusing most of the time in the course, in the project planning part. We developed, or the company developed, a value chain model of the asset. And this value chain model has most of the disciplines that are involved in field development. Here I have made just a few, like the subsurface. This will be the reservoir, geologist, geophysicist. Then you have some others that are in charge of the architecture, the subsea system, the marine environment. Then you have someone that is more in charge of the scheduling, the project management. And then you have some other people that are in charge of the economy, cost estimation, topside process, etc. So initially, in the early stages, you have a lot of options within each one of these squares. In this value chain model, you have a lot of options, and is a lot of uncertainty in the information. And then as you progress in this timeline, you are maybe making it more complex. The value chain model is growing and including more and more aspects. But also at the same time, you are discarding alternatives that are not feasible or that are not attractive as others, because could be economically they're less profitable than others, maybe they're not technologically viable, etc. Until you find at the end is that at DG3 you already have a clear plan on how you're going to develop your field, and that's the one that you're going to go forward on the project execution phase. This is a more detailed value chain model. Here you see we have expanded a bit the our subsurface. We have reservoir structure and volume. We have the petrophysical properties, just like porosity, permeability. We have the fluid characteristics, the API, the gas-oil ratio of the oil. We have the reserves, that it's kind of a combination of volumes and properties of the rock and properties of the fluid. Then we see how we're going to recover that um, those reserves, more like a dynamic, goes from a static to a dynamic model. Then I define a schedule, how I'm going to produce my reserves. Then go on the architecture part. I have different things. I have wells, I have the offshore structure, the processing facility, the subsea system. Um, with these things, I usually can generate like how much things are going to cost after I know how many wells, what is the depth, what is the construction, the architecture of the well, what kind of offshore structure, what capacity that structure needs to have, how many subsea templates. With all of this information, I can compute the cost. Okay, and here we have some CapEx stands for capital expenditures, operational expenditures. We can also know how much that's going to cost to decommission, to remove these facilities at the end of the life of the field. And then we have with the production profile that I calculate with the architecture, how many wells, and with the reservoir information, then I can compute the production profile of the field. And with the production profile, I can calculate the revenue stream. I can get the taxes that I will have to pay. I have also, if I depend on export, I need to put some cost of export. Also, if it's gas, I need to pay tariff to the pipeline, for example. And with all of that information, I eventually go and calculate in the economical part, I calculate the net present value of the project, which is one of the most important indicators in this value chain model. And that's typically one of the things that I used for taking decisions if to go further or not with one concept or with a given discovery. And you see here we have some variables in these boxes that are highly uncertain. Cost is very uncertain. The reserves, the fluid, what is the structure. Um, these are things that are very uncertain, and the hydrocarbon price is one of them, especially the oil price. So let's go one by one through these main phases, and I will be some slides are a bit heavy with text, but I will go through each one of these phases and I try to highlight what are the main activities happening in each one of these phases. So let's start with identification of business case. And the main goal of this phase is to first to come up with a discovery, to discover something, and to try to determine if there is an economic potential of the discovery. Okay, try to quantify and reduce the uncertainty in the reserves that I have, to try to find out in a better way what do I have in the subsurface. Some tasks are pre-exploration, or it's called scouting, and it's collecting information on areas of interest. And these have to take a lot of considerations, technical, political, geological, geographical, social, environmental. Um, Also, maybe there are some areas which the company is already comfortable with or has worked with in the past, or maybe has some partner that has some indication that there is something in the area. Um, eh, Yes, so also expected size of reserves, political regime, if we are not talking now about Norway only, but some other parts in the world, government stability, technical challenges of the area, if it's the Arctic area, if it's very deep in the Gulf of Mexico, the taxation regime, security of personnel, if I will be able to travel to and from the field, if the field doesn't have risks to be attacked in the region, or an arm offensive. Then environmental sensitivity. Uh, yes. Then after this phase, the pre-exploration and scouting, even parallel to that, it's also there is an option to get pre-exploration access. It means that you need to get more information about the area, and it was not enough with this information that was available to take a decision to determine if there is an interesting prospect there. So you can apply, usually countries they have exploration license, and these are usually non-exclusive. There might be others that are in the same area conducting exploration. And in the Norwegian, NCS stands for Norwegian Continental Shelf, and only in this, if you get pre-exploration access, only seismic and shallow wells are allowed. And this is not done typically by an oil company, but this is done by a specialized company that they do it and then later they sell the data to the oil companies. The size of these licenses varies, but it's around 500 square kilometers. And the main intention of this phase is to identify prospects. Here are some, for those of you who don't have background in petroleum, so the seismic, this is the source where I took these images from. You emit um, a wave, a source of a wave, usually by an air gun, and then you generate a wave, and you have, in this case, the ship is pulling an array of hydrophones that are measuring when each way these waves are being reflected. And by the time it takes to travel to certain areas and how it reflects, you can get to map what is in the subsurface. And these usually are made in rectangular grids, and this is an example of one of these lines, one of these cuts, what you can get, and you get some image of the subsurface and you get some structures. You can get a picture of what could be laying underground. Then after that, if I see that there is big potential, but I need to do some more exploration, and I need to essentially verify my findings with all other methods, then the companies can apply. This has to be done by the company that will be the operator and the partners. So they can apply and obtain an exclusive production license, and the time, it's at least in Norway, is 6 years, but can be to extend it to 30 years. And in the Norwegian continental shelf, there are two types of production licenses. So one of them is licensing rounds. These are for called frontier areas or new, what they call new areas, or awards in predefined areas called APA. And these are like existing areas where we have maybe some existing fields, and these are for example, for the Barents Sea, um, they will be usually qualified as licensing rounds. If you apply for this license and there is a fee for applying, and to encourage you to go from discovery to development as soon as possible, there are some fees that the companies are charged if there is no exploration or if there is no production. Okay, for example, if I think these numbers, I think they are from for 2019, but for the first year, that's the price in Norwegian kroner per square kilometer for the first year, and they go increasing in the second and the third year. And that's simply to encourage, if they are simply they got the license, but the company is not doing anything, is just to encourage them to do something with the license. Then after the company gets the production license, then they can do actually can do things in more invasive things in the underground. So some of these things are geological studies, geophysical surveys, seismic exploration drilling. And in exploration drilling, there are a few things that are usually made. There are cores, well cores. Here is some coring, how coring is performed. Uh, well cores, wall cores, cutting samples, fluid samples, wireline, logs. productivity test. So we perform all of these tests. The companies perform all of these tests, usually also using contractors, and finally they have a discovery if they are lucky. Some other things that are done is, for example, doing logging to try to determine the different layers and the content of each layer and the properties of each layer. And if they're lucky, they have a discovery. Here is a video. You can click on the link that should appear here someplace, and that's to see how it works, the fluid sampling, and also the formation tester of Halliburton. It's called DST, Drill Stem Test, and you can see what is that about. So after we have a discovery, we try to assess the discovery and the uncertainty associated with this discovery. And from the technical part, there are other things, as I mentioned before, the political aspects, the location, the social, geographical, access, etc. But they are, from the reservoir engineering side, is try to determine how big is my discovery. So in that case, usually is perform a probabilistic reserve estimation, try to identify and assess the size. Here you have its field in offshore Israel called Karish and Tenin. And here you have on the x-axis you have the gas initially in place in billion cubic feet. And here you see the probability distribution. So this tells you that the field has most likely figures in 2,400 billion cubic feet of gas in place, but it could also have, there is some probability that it could have higher volumes and also could have lower volumes. We're going to talk about these figures at a later stage. So then after I determine how much I have, I try to make a economic evaluation. In here I try to put the revenue from selling this hydrocarbon and also the cost that it takes to extract the hydrocarbon. That means the infrastructure, the facilities, and also the operational cost. And if necessary, might be that the spread is too large. If I have, I'm not sure if the reserves are quite big or are quite small, I have a lot of spread in this distribution, then I might choose to do appraisal to try to reduce uncertainty. An appraisal typically means is usually made with exploration wells and seismic. Seismic, I might reduce the density of this grid to try to get more information. For example, there are some pockets that might not be communicating. Okay, in that case, each one will need a separate well. This will add the cost. Might be that the pockets, I can drain them with the same well. The extent of the reservoir, the behavior of the aquifer, if it's a big aquifer, small aquifer, if it's connected to the reservoir, if there are any barriers in the vertical direction, location of the water oil contact, and also the gas oil contact. Here is an example, a simplified figure of appraisal that I try to see the extent of the reservoir by drilling and see until which location it extends. So this is the end of this phase, and then I come to the decision gate. And in the decision gate, there are a few actions that have to be taken at this stage. So one is to issue a SOC, is a statement of commerciality, and proceed with the development. I can decide to repeat. I have to get more information to decide if to go further or not. So I can decide to do more appraisal. I can decide to sell the discovery to someone else. I can do nothing, just wait maybe for the market to get better, for the prices to get up, or to wait for the outcome of some neighboring discoveries that I can use to develop as an area, or I can relinquish to the government the license. because maybe the findings they were not profitable enough. So now let's go to the project planning phase. And within the project planning phase, let's go to the first one, which is the feasibility studies. So in the studies, the main objective is to find uh, at least one, but I should get a range of concepts that are technically, commercially, and organizationally feasible for the company. Okay? And that means to develop further the project. And usually here is objectives of the development in line with the corporate strategy, establish feasible development scenarios, and create a project timeline and a work plan. Here is one example from a presentation made by Lundin Energy in 2017, and you see they already are coming up with how many wells I need in these two fields and what is the sequence I should drill these wells. I can try to start to look into possible offshore structures that I could use to develop the field. And some of the tasks they have to determine at this phase is to try to look at potential technology gaps and blockers. For example, some subsea fields, I might have some flow assurance issue, might have some formation of wax, or due to the low temperature, for me, I can have a very high viscosity and it's difficult for the oil to flow. Identify the needs for new technology related to the technical challenges. Um, for example, might be quite a challenging location in the ocean where um, makes it very susceptible, the structure, to particular type of waves or currents. Identify added value opportunities. That's related to if you have neighboring developments or if I could produce to an existing facility, for example. And one thing that is usually made at this phase is to try to make a rough cost evaluation for all options. And at this stage, these figures are very uncertain, usually plus minus 40%, but to try just to get an indication of how much it will cost. Then comes after that, we have a decision gate called 1, where we decide again to repeat the phase, to redo the phase. We decide to do some more things or to continue or to abandon. And in concept planning, I have to go deeper into these feasible ideas that I came up with in DG in the previous step in feasibility studies. And I have to try to analyze each one of them, expand them even further, try to make a cost estimation and economic analysis for all of them, and rank them, and select and document the most likely concept or strategy. That's called the base case scenario. Okay, so I'm evaluating and comparing, okay, trying to remove or screen out those scenarios that are not going to be viable. This is very important. You prepare a PEP, a project execution plan, which describes the project and management system. That is going to be very critical for future steps. And define the commercial aspects, legislation, agreement, financing, marketing, and supply, taxes, all these are related to the field. Some engineering tasks that are made are, in this case, I try to come up with a static and a dynamic model of the reservoir. The volumes, uh, the geometry, but also dynamic in terms of how this rock is going, how this fluid is going to flow. Okay, how is the fluid going to flow in the reservoir? Then define the depletion and production strategy that typically I try to come up during this phase, during concept planning, try to how I'm going to produce the field, how many wells I'm going to need, what rates I'm going to produce in which year. Define HSC, Health, Safety and Environment Program. I perform a flow assurance evaluation. That's very important, especially for offshore fields that have subsea wells. And I have to determine challenges related to flow assurance, okay, that are fluid properties, handling, and the pressure. I look also into the well planning, as the well schedule is related to how I'm going to produce, which well will produce when. I pre-design the facilities, what kind of capacities, what kind of equipment I need to process these fluids according to this production profile, planning of operations, startup and maintenance, and I perform a more in-depth and less rough, still rough, but with less uncertainty of cost and manpower estimates of the best viable concept. After that, DG2, I already try to pick a concept. It's more or less locked, the concept, how I'm going to produce the field, roughly how many wells I need, the strategy for flow assurance, safety, and the plan. And then I proceed to the pre-engineering phase. One thing to notice here is that all of this project planning, usually in all of this project planning phase, usually the authorities, the government, they are involved somehow, they are in dialogue with the company. And they give the companies, the operator and the partner, they present their findings and their plans, and they get some feedback from the governmental authorities. In this case, the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate. Okay, and in the pre-engineering, once I have the preferred concept, the most attractive, I mature, define and refine the concept. Okay, try to refine it to get to determine all the small details of that, not small details, but the main details of the concept. Then I execute front-end engineering and design studies. And these are essentially based on trying to start to paint and to come up with the system that I'm going to use. Then I start to determine the requirements, the technical requirements I will need. For example, for the topside facilities, I decide, well, I need a system that I could process this amount of crude, this amount of gas, this amount of water, that the oil and the gas and the water will have the following properties. I need, for example, if I'm going to do gas injection, water injection, um, also for drilling, what are the wells, how many wells, where I'm going to drill them, what's going to be the completion of these wells. Okay, and then here usually the technical requirements are arranged in packages. So I make a package, and then these are technical requirements that are the company later sends to the contractor, to engineering companies, that they can come up with offers on depending on the requirements. You estimate the cost again of each package and plan and prepare for the execution phase. One of the main important outcomes of this phase is of the pre-engineering is the preparation of the plan for development and operations. Okay, here you have a snapshot, and I will put here a link um, to the website, to my website, where you have some examples of PDOs, plan for development and operation. Okay, and in this case, the PDO is presenting the plan, how the field is going to be developed to the authorities, to the government. And also it includes also a separate report where it has the environmental impact assessment. It also establishes the basis. This is the packages for awarding contracts. And these are the documents usually that are provided. The PDO, Plan for Installation and Operation, PIO, at least in Norway, and the Impact Assessment Report. Usually the PDO you can get, what is public is a summary version that is sent to the parliament in Norway. But the Impact Assessment Report usually you can get freely, or it's available publicly online. So you can, this one usually has a lot of information from the PDO. So some task here in the pre-engineering, this is taken from this report for a field called Ivarosen that is now operated by Aker BP. And here it shows, for example, fish. We have two species, sei and toshk, and it shows depending where the field is located and how is it located with respect to areas of this is the where they lay the eggs, where they grow, where they roam. So how is going to impact the life of that particular fish, okay, of that particular species. Torsk is cod in English. Okay, these are some other charts that are studies that are made. Here is the location of that field, and here you see the areas that are where some birds, okay, seabirds, that where are they breeding. Okay, so this is the location of the field with respect to those areas and how it might affect the bird life. Here you see these are some trajectories for fishing using bottom trawling, and how is the field located according to these areas. So you see in that case it seems there is no conflict with that. By the way, these images, I took them from the environmental report that I mentioned here, the impact assessment report that is freely available online or publicly available online. Okay, that's something on the marine traffic, and here I'm not sure exactly what all the colors mean, but it's simply the marine traffic, and these are existing lines of gas. You have existing field, existing routes, and compared to where the field is going to be located. Other tasks that are done, it's for example, here is the CO2 emissions in ton per year, and how are they going to be split during the life of during the construction and the operation phase. You see, initially most of them are going to be located in the drilling. Then you have some vessels, supply vessel, standby vessel, helicopter. This is flaring. Um, Diesel generator, and this later at the later stage when the field starts to produce, you see that most of the emissions they are due actually to production. Yeah, and these are forecast emissions. Okay, these are some estimates on this is the cuttings, drilling cuttings that are going to be produced during drilling the wells in this field. This is the type of drilling mud that is going to be used, water-based, oil-based, and the amounts. Okay, these are the amounts of cuttings that are going to be produced. So with that, you can know how they're going to deposit around the platform and how are they going to spread. Okay, the thickness along the distance from the platform and how long they're going to spread. Very important, especially for oil-based mud. Here you see other analysis on this is in case there is a blowout, subsea blowout occurring in the field of oil. Oh, these are for different amounts of oil. Okay, so it's not on time, but this figure is showing its amounts between 1 and 100 ton. There is a probability that most of this area, if there is a blowout, subsea blowout, this area will be highly likely to encounter those amounts. Then you have some areas that have less, so it's reduced to this area. And then you have some other areas where you might have these amounts of oil, but there is less likely. Okay, and here you have higher amounts, 100 and 500. There is really just a very low, almost no probability that will be high probability in this area, but you have something between 36 and 50% in this small dot here. And then you see higher amounts, 500 to 1000 or more than 1000, there is very reduced. It's just around the field. Okay, then the PDO and these documents are sent, and the company just waits for the government to study the proposal and approve it, give back comments or suggestions depending on the evaluation. And then after the PDO is approved, then starts the project execution phase where we have these three phases. So the pre-engineering, it makes a design, a more detailed design of all the system. But after that's performed, you send that information to the engineering companies and to contractors that they're actually going to design more in detail every small element of the system. Okay, they design exactly the size of the pipe, the thickness, the thread, the connection, the length of the pipe, the support, the subsea system. So that's this part, the detail engineering. Okay, detail design, procurement, construction, installation, and commissioning of the facilities. And this can be done in two ways. One way is that the company establish individual contracts with each company, with each contractor and each engineering company. But one of the problems is that the project management relies very heavily on the oil company. Okay, so here it has detail engineering, bids, you have to work with separate bids and contracts, construction, fabrication, installation, and commissioning. Well, there is another way that you can make EPCM contracts. These are contracts that are engineering, procurement, construction, and management. And there is one main contractor, and that contractor will have more control of the schedule of the management of all the sub activities. They might still send a lot of things to subcontractors, but they have more control on the on the management of the execution of the project. Here there is a video about the Aasta Hansteen development. It's a field in the offshore, we could say offshore Trondheim, a bit farther north, and it's one of the deepest gas fields in Norway. I think it's 1500 water depth. And yeah, so this is showing how is the construction of the offshore structure of Aasta Hansteen. It's operated by Equinor. Okay, you're going to watch it. I'm going to put the link here. And then the second video is one on the pipeline of from this field. There will be because it's gas, so you have to have a gas transportation line from the field to shore to its gas processing facility located in it's called Nyhamna. Okay, it's close to Kristiansund. And this is the second part. It details the construction of the pipeline from the field to Nyhamna. It's called Poraled. Okay, other tasks: constructing wells, drilling wells, completing wells, perform handover to asset operations, and prepare to start up operation and maintenance, documenting, creating documentation and user manuals, etc. After that comes operations, and in operations, as we discussed earlier, we have very detailed phases, and we're going to talk a bit later. There are some differences if it's an onshore and offshore field, but we have essentially startup, build-up phase, then we have a plateau phase, and then we have the decline phase. All of these names, they have to do with the rate. Okay, startup, build up, I start to build up the rate of the field, you see it's going up. Plateau, usually we have a period where the rate from the field is constant, and then we have the decline, it starts to go down. Tail production, just the end of that decline and the shutdown of the field. We usually operation, very important, perform maintenance, intervention, also planning if there are some ways that you can get more oil out of the reservoir after you get more information. So this is improved oil recovery that might include measures that you do apply on the reservoir, like EOR, or also measures that you can apply elsewhere, like in the artificial lift, in the wells, in the platforms, in the transportation system. Allocation and metering, how much you are producing, because at the end You are splitting. First, you have to report these numbers to the government to pay the tax, but also you have to split sometimes between partners. So allocation, and it's very important for also for if you are reservoir engineers, for example, they like to forecast future production. So if they get more information from measurements, then they can have a better model that supposedly will be closer to the actual field. Debottlenecking, this refers to when I have, for example, excessive water production. I sized my facilities, I designed my facilities to take, for example, some amount of oil, gas, and water. But if that means that I won't be able to produce more than what was designed for. Okay, so there might be a well that could be producing too much water and then it's collapsing or is taking the capacity of the facilities to the limit. Okay, troubleshooting, if I have any problems, I to take measures to try to discover the reason for the problems and then to try to take actions, corrective actions. Abandonment and decommissioning, some task essentially is clearing out, trying to clear the area to what it was originally. So some things that are performed just after shutdown is engineering down and clean, trying to flush and clean tanks, equipment, and piping, because I don't want any release of these flammable substances and toxic substances to other places, to like the sea, to the environment. I have to coordinate with environmental and governmental authorities to that the field will be shut down. One major and critical activity here is to plug an abandoned well, some call often P&A, and the government takes a big chunk of this cost. And this usually involves cut and remove well conductor and casing. Then the topside equipment has to be removed. The offshore structure usually has to be removed, and this requires lifting operations with cranes, with vessels that come and carry and take part of the structure and transport it to shore. Remove, or sometimes it can be allowed to leave subsea pipelines but bury them, such that they don't cause issues with, for example, fishing. That's also something very important. After the offshore structure and the pipeline, you have to mark and register this on marine maps such that you avoid, for example, collisions, or you avoid people fishing boats. They know that there is something below that they might get, for example, the net stuck, or yeah, or have collision also. Monitoring, want to monitor if there are no leakages, for example, from the wells that are plugged and abandoned, that they are maintained, the seal is maintained. And something also interesting is that the material that you have is usually recovered. The material either from the well, from the platform, topside, from the subsea system, and the steel is recovered, and you try also to recycle equipment from, for example, the processing facilities try to recycle turbines, separators, heat exchanger, that they could be used in some other applications. Okay, disposal FPSOs, for example, they are typically reused in after they are brought to land, they are refurbished, they are maintained, and they are upgraded. They can be used in other fields. And disposal of residues, that this sometimes is an activity that it actually gives some earnings to the abandonment companies, because this residue they can sell some amounts of oil. Uh, Here is a video of, I will put the link here, is to the dismantling of the IME platform in the Norwegian continental shelf. And it's very impressive. It was made, instead of cutting it piece by piece, they just lifted the whole platform with a vessel and they transport it to shore. And the second video, I will put the link here, is to a company called AF Decom. It's a Norwegian company, and it gives an overview of their activities, but from there you can get an overview of all the kind of decommission activities that take place. That's all for today. Thank you.